Hello and welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm here with my co-host Matt
So,
and a special guest, our college football specialist, Kenny.
Hey, everybody.
All right, and with no further ado, let's get into it. The topic of discussion today is going to be the top 10 wide receivers for this year's draft class. So a little bit different. We might approach a fantasy angle after these guys are drafted, but in terms of them as prospects, we wanted to get into some analysis. We're going to be talking to Kenny, who knows a lot more about these players than I do, and talk about some possible ideal landing spots and some upsides that they might have depending on which team they land with. So Matt, I'll throw it over to you to tee up the first player.
yeah, awesome. Yeah, Kenny, thanks again for joining. Last year when I sent you, asked for your top 10, I think you had Quentin Johnston outside the top 10. You had Tank Dell at 3. So I've always valued your opinion with wide receiver, and I know you're not afraid to kind of go off script. So yeah, maybe we'll just start with one, and I'm sure one is probably what we're thinking. But yeah, run through it. What do you got?
Yeah, man. So, thanks for having me, guys. And it's pretty obvious here who I'm going to be looking at number one. It's a guy that we're all familiar with, an MHJ out of Ohio State, Marvin Harrison Jr. And the thing with Marvin that just really just captivates me is his ability to separate from receivers kind of within the first 10 yards of his routes. I mean, you consistently see it show up in game after game after game. This guy has a way of just manipulating the DBs or his own routes in order to find open space. And it's not more so that he just does it in, kind of strategic routes that they have set up for him. He does it against zone concepts or against man, right? So he's really good at finding pockets and running some of those really deep in and dig routes that they like to run there at Ohio State for their receivers. And more so than that, obviously his production has taken off, and he's been productive, ever since he did step into that role there at Ohio State, kind of late in his freshman year with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave deciding to sit out. So it was him and JSN working together to go up against Utah. And you saw it there early, right? Like the guy's ability to, again, within that first 10 yards, find separation on things as simple as, just corner fades, right? And ability to find a way to come up with the ball has always been, I think, his greatest ability, right? He's a great pass catcher. He's got really strong hands. And I think that, obviously having, his father as one of the greatest receivers of all times has really helped him, but it really hasn't helped. It really hasn't strayed him away from putting in the work and really grinding to get better year after year. And we've seen that with his overall, production over at Ohio State, right? Like, he takes off. He has the tremendous sophomore year. It's outright arguably the top receiver in the country, comes right back the year after and does it again, right? And is the best player on a team filled with great players and number one draft picks all around. So Marvin, the reason that I think that he's separated a little bit from some of the other guys and what really kind of makes him that number one pick is that he's going to be able to step into an NFL offense. And I think that he's going to be able to take on some of those heavier hitting DBs and heavier pressure DBs that you see in the NFL without any problems because of his size, because of his strength and his ability to just go up and win the ball, 50 or not. He's going to find a way to come down with those balls. So I think Marvin has a tremendous chance to be an all-pro player, a 100 reception type guy. And if you see him, there's a lot of talks out there that Arizona is obviously going to have interest in him. They need a receiver, obviously moving on from DeAndre Hopkins. And there's also some chatter around Chicago trying to find a way to get Caleb and then also go in and get Marvin as well, maybe making some moves to get up in the draft. But wouldn't be too uncommon if they were able to do that. We saw Houston kind of do something similar in the fact that they got CJ Stroud last year, and then they also were able to get
Will Anderson
as well, right? So it would be great
they
for
jumped
Caleb
from
to
12 to 3 to do that, right? And we're talking we're likely talking about the Bears having to go from 9 to 4, which would be interesting to trade up for a receiver like that. My opinion on that is that you never see you never see teams trade up necessarily for receivers. Like even Jamar Chase, who had a similar amount of hype around him as Marvin Harrison Jr. There was not really a lot of buzz about trading up to go get him. And even Kyle Pitts, like an offensive weapon, went in front of him in the draft, which obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but I think was a mistake. So I don't think there's no shot Bowers is going in front of Marvin Harrison. But yeah, I think the most interesting thing that you said from a fantasy perspective on that whole breakdown is you think he could be 100 catch player, because Marvin Harrison's also an athletic freak and has so much ability down the field that if you think he's going to be a 100 catch player eventually, I mean, that could be talking about historic type level seasons. So maybe go a little bit into that, what you think his upside from a numbers perspective could be.
Yeah, I think, looking at what he did, and obviously going back to Ohio State, they did have CJ Stroud. So he was working with, number one quarterback while he was there. And even this last year, Ohio State, he had just about 67 catches, 1,200 yards, 14 touchdowns that last year. And with the increase, if you're looking at that and you're trying to weigh it against how he's going to perform in the NFL, well, if he goes to a team like the Cardinals, he's going to be option number one right when he steps into the door there. And then, especially with Kyler Murray, somebody he can, team up with, I think that Marvin's got, again, that great ability to go in and run those dig routes and kind of make separation. And why that's going to allow him to have, over 100 catches is because the Cardinals don't necessarily have another top tier burner on their other side, right? Like they do have the kid for Purdue right now. I'm forgetting his name, but
Rondale Moore. No, they traded him.
Rondale Moore is my guy. And he does have the burner ability, but we haven't really seen him over the top.
I think they got rid of him.
They moved off of Marquise Brown and Rondale Moore this offseason. That's why wide receiver is such a huge need for them, and why they might decide to stick and not build draft capital, and maybe try and pursue a different receiver down in the draft. But yeah, they are hurting at wide receiver because Marquise Brown and Rondale Moore both are gone.
Right. Okay. So taking that in consideration, and that's my mistake. Sorry about that, Rondale. But for them, they're going to need somebody that can, help them drive and get down the field. And it's not going to just be going over the top play after play, right? They're going to be locked in on Marvin. So he's going to have to find different ways to get open, right? And the one thing with Kyler, with him being of smaller stature, we've seen it over his career. He does like to move around and he does like to escape the pocket. And Marvin displayed a great ability to do that too. And I think everybody can kind of go back to that Georgia game that he had where CJ Stroud was running around quite a bit, right? Showing some athleticism, moving around outside the pocket. And Marvin was torching what is, a defensive backfield filled with, top first round and second round draft picks all around the board. So, I mean, Marvin's ability to work with his quarterbacks, no matter which quarterback he's had, has been tremendous. And I see that being a good fit for him if he does land in Arizona with Kyler. And then another thing with Kyler is just a little bit of his smaller stature. He does like to find his avenues and his lanes in between his linemen as opposed to throwing over the top of them. More to say. So a lot of times when you see that, you see receivers who are running in routes or making plays across the middle of the field that helps them catch the ball in their quarterback's natural passing lane. So that's where I think he can fall in there.
All right. I got two quick hitters for you here. Oh, go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, unless the Pats take him, he's either going to Kyler or to Justin Herbert. So I think he's in such a good spot, just the way those teams finished this year. So that's exciting.
Yeah, and so building off of that too, the first quick hitter that I wanted to ask you, which team of those three that Matt just mentioned do you think is the best fit for him?
The best.
Or where do you want to see him?
Yeah. To kind of piggyback off of Matt, and I looked at this, I would love to see him down in Los Angeles. I still do that from time to time, but I would love to see him land with the Chargers. I think that, when you look back on Harbaugh's career, obviously he's been an offensive defensive line guy, first and foremost, but even during his time with the Niners, right, they always kind of had these sturdy receivers that they like to that they like to put on the field. So your Michael Crabtrees, your Anquan Boldens, right? Guys who can catch a high volume of passes, but maybe not necessarily going over the top all of the time. I think that Harbaugh's going to install some of that pro style play action that he utilized with the Niners, as well as during his time at Michigan. Marvin can fit really well into that because he's going to be able to run those routes, run deceptive routes, and get over the top of defenses when they do hit play action. But as far as Justin Herbert being able to hit him in stride on time when he breaks his routes immediately, getting separation from those DBs, I think that, his best chance of success is teaming up with a guy like Justin Herbert, who's going to be able to find him and get him the ball as much as he sees fit.
All right, awesome. And one more quick hitter, just a name, before we move on to number 2. Who's his NFL comp that you would say?
Ooh, that's a great one. I think, for Marvin Harrison, he truthfully, I know this is kind of a big name, but he reminds me a lot of Julio Jones in the sense that he's just big, 6'4". He's only getting stronger. And while he can look slender at sometimes, he is really strong. You can see his build he's got the athletic frame, and his ability, again, to just go up and win 50-50 balls and turn them into 70-20 ball or 70-30 balls is incredible. So I see him fitting a lot like Julio Jones. Now, it's big shoes to fill, but I think if he's paired with the right quarterback like Julio was, he's got a chance of tremendous success.
All right, awesome. Let's move on to number 2.
I'll never forget the just one last little tidbit to add. I don't remember when it was, a year ago or so, the Ohio State wide receivers coach was asked to rank his top guys, and it was like he started with Marv, no questions asked, and then he got to Garrett, JSN, Olave, and maybe he was just hyping him up, but I think just the fact that was just his, once I get past Marv, like now I can rank these other guys. So
yeah, I remember that too. It was great.
All right, number 2, Ken, what do you got?
All right, so going in at number 2, I do have Rome Odunze out of Washington, right? Rome, I'm really excited about Rome. I really love watching him progress. He's a kid out of, Nevada powerhouse, Bishop Gorman. Chose Washington early on in his high school career, decided to go there and work with them, and kind of stayed with them even through that kind of bumpy transition they had there through their head coaches, right? But I think over this last 2 years, we've just seen Rome blossom into a truly top tier receiver. Very slashy, can get open at any point of the field, whether he's running deep routes, fades, crossers, slants, you name it, he's put it on tape. He's willing to go across the field, which he did a lot with Washington, which is kind of surprising for somebody like him because, he has that over top ability, but he's not afraid to go over the middle and mix it up with those guys in there. And he had a great quote that I heard him say earlier this year where he was talking about, his mentality going after the ball and winning every 50-50 ball, and he said there are no 50-50 balls, it's just me, right? So he's kind of got that dog mentality in him where he doesn't believe that there's another DB on the field that can really match him and his play and his ability to put up really productive numbers. And what he did this year with Michael Penix was really special. I mean, arguably it was him and Penix kind of carrying them during that back half to the national championship, right? I mean, the game against Oregon State, he goes out there, he balls out for 3 touchdowns in the rainy weather to get them over the hump and kind of game that they needed to have, right? And Oregon State was clearly no slouch, but also the fact that he was able to put up, 92 catches, 1,600 yards with arguably 2 other NFL wide receivers on his team is incredible, right? I mean, Jalen McMillan and Jalen Polk are 2 tremendous receivers. And I think that, Rome was able to still find a way to be productive with only 1 ball to go around. And clearly he was Penix's favorite pass catcher. And I know, before Penix got there, he was dealing with a right-armed quarterback, and his ability to, I think that's sometimes a little bit underrated, is catching the ball from a different or a left-handed thrower, right? When you've been utilized or you've been used to, receiving right-handed throws for most of your life. It's a different area and a different concentration that you kind of have to master. The ball comes out just a little bit different, and the spiral obviously changes things. And the fact that he was still able to overcome that and still put up really productive yards this year was great. I love the fact that he can play outside or inside. I mean, he goes into the slot numerous times, and he's not afraid to get up behind the linebackers and go up again for that kind of that seam ball in between the safeties and the linebackers there, which is, sometimes maybe not in today's NFL, but at previous times was a kill shot. So, and those hits still hurt, right? It might not be a kill shot, but there's still guys there that are looking to make their paychecks too and make sure that you don't come up with the ball. And so he goes up and he gets it, and he's explosive and and he's explosive in the way that he goes up and gets the ball. And then the second thing that I really do like about Rome is the fact that he's got punt return ability, right? I mean, the guy took one to the house for Washington. He was arguably the best punt returner. They had a couple of guys that they can mix it up in there with, but the fact that they were still willing to put their best receiver on the field and put the ball and find other ways to get the ball in his hands as far as putting him on special teams is can't be overlooked, because that's something that can be utilized by NFL teams where they pick up a receiver like himself. I remember, our friend Antonio Brown used to do it for the Steelers all the time, even though he was their number one wide receiver, right? When they needed a big play or something to happen, they throw that guy back there on special teams and find another way to get the ball in his hands.
That's what does with his guys too a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
That he's got the personality for special teams too.
Right. Yeah, he does, man. He's definitely a drop kicker, So
Rome. So jumping into I do want to say, because I think a lot of people have Malik Nabers right over Odunze here. So this is the first one where we're maybe getting caught a little bit by surprise on your list here. So I do want to ask specifically, because does the size Odunze presents versus Nabers have a impact on how you view them, or does it factor into the reason why you put Odunze ahead of Nabers? Because I think athletically, like, Nabers just lit up his pro day, like he's blazing speed, all kinds of routes, like very, very good athlete, can jump through the gym. I think that there's like Malik Nabers is on a different level than Odunze in terms of prospect rating. So maybe you can talk to that a little bit, the size element, and maybe start comparing him a little bit to Malik Nabers, who I'm assuming is your next one, but I don't know. So we'll get into that after.
Yeah, well, I mean, Trev, you hit it right on the head. For me, it was Rome's size, right? The fact that he's just a little bit taller, a little bit more built, was something that was big. As we're seeing shift to DBs that are in that 6'2", 6'3". The fact that Rome is 6'3", that he's still as versatile as he is, even at that height, was something that I think couldn't be ignored. I thought that, Malik Nabers is a tremendous wide receiver, and kind of when you're picking these guys, it's going 1A, 1B, 1C at sometimes at certain points. But you look at Rome, and I think the biggest thing that again separated Rome from me was his ability to make, like, he showed up, I'd say, at the most crucial times team in his games, and that being more sort of in the fourth quarter during tight games, need to have it catches. You look at the Oregon game this year, right? Fourth quarter drive, tie game, got to have a play. I believe they're going down on either third, fourth down, and he goes and he runs a nice fade route on Oregon's top DB, catches it to put his team, in field goal and scoring position late into that game, and that can't be, undervalued. I think that's big, to show up in those moments and not allow the pressure to get to you and still be, an excellent person in your craft. Now Malik has obviously been there too. It's not like the LSU was lacking when it came to production or showing up, right? But their games, I think the games that they played at LSU this year, not due to their offense, but more so to their defense, there just weren't as many of those crucial moments that you saw that it really came down to for LSU. But I think that for me, it's just, I think Rome has that ability to show the big moments for his team, and he has a little bit more size. So I'm leaning more towards Rome, and I think that's going to help him moving forward. But again, yeah, Malik is still right there too, and just gotta. I guess it can help me transition into that because I will have next on my list is going to be Mr. Malik Nabers.
All right, good. There he is. I was expecting that. On Odunze, before we move off him real quick, who's his NFL comp, would you say?
Who when I thought about Odunze and I was looking at him, it's funny. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but I actually had him as a Keenan Allen type. He's a type who can get open. I think he knows exactly how he's running his routes, whether it's man or zone, but he did a great job this year sitting in some of those zone pockets that you see a lot of receivers run through or get a little too much depth or get too far close to the defender. So I think Keenan Allen is a great pick for him. He's not necessarily going to always burn every DB he comes up against, but he does have the ability to get over the top if you put him in the right position. It's in kind of that take a chance or take a shot area, 40, 35 going in, man. He can create enough separation to go out there and get it.
All right, awesome. And the last thing I want to ask you here we can get into this during Nabers as well. Do you actually think Odunze is going to get drafted ahead of Nabers?
Truly, I don't. I don't believe he will. I don't believe Odunze will be ahead of Nabers. And credit to Nabers and credit to really the whole entire staff, community, and longstanding history of putting receivers in the NFL that are very productive. Yeah. There's something to be said about that too. And so those relationships are longstanding with a lot of those NFL franchises. You haven't seen as many wide receivers coming out of Washington to do it in the way that they have and see that production. So I think that's going to also help Malik Nabers and some of his counterparts going into the NFL.
Yeah, and to build on your point too, that the 1 A, B, and C. I mean, there's a chance that these three guys go 4, 5, 6. If all of these teams, the Chargers and Giants, all just sit in their spots, right? They could all just take these three guys right in a row. So, all right, let's get into Nabers. So let's hear more about him.
Yeah, Malik Nabers, as you said. I mean, wow, what a pro day that guy just had, right? 4.3, jumping out of the gym, 42-inch vert, right? Just checking every box.
Yeah.
I mean, just checking every box an athletic freak should when it comes to them playing as a wide receiver in the NFL and trying to be a wide receiver number one. I thought, obviously with the growth from Jaden Daniels this year, we saw a tremendous amount of output from Malik Nabers and the LSU Tigers as a whole on their offensive side. But I think that talent was always there. I remember Malik Nabers actually a couple years back, he had a situation where he was going to return a punt and he ended up dropping it and was just kind of having a rough game against another SEC opponent. And I remember he came back later in that game, caught a deep bomb. I'm trying to remember if it was Alabama or not, but early on, I saw, okay, this kid's got potential, right? Now, there were some kind of ups and downs there at LSU towards the beginning of his tenure. Got a little bit of trouble with the team, was, kind of figuring out where he was going to be, if he was going to stay with LSU, ended up staying. And I'm happy he did. I'm happy that he was able to work through that. It seems like once Brian Kelly got in the door, they were able to kind of get things back on the right path for him as far as, getting him where he needed to be on the field and elite production. I do think that he's a great fit outside. I mean, he's a guy that can absolutely tear the top off of the defense. And he probably does that just a little bit better than Rome from time to time, just because he is that athletic of a freak. I mean, how many times this year did we watch this guy and you watch the tape of him and he's 15 yards away from the next DB? And it's not like he really faked him out with any sort of double move. This was just a straight go, and the guy's legs weren't as fast as his were, right? I mean, you look at his body type, the guy, his quads are there to rival Saquon as soon as he steps through an NFL door. So
James catching passes. Different specimen.
Yeah, absolutely. That's who they breed him down in SEC country. And so I think that he's I think that one thing I really liked about him, and we'll get into one of his teammates later, but his production was through the roof. For the 89 catches, was great, but 1,500 yards on top of that, 14 touchdowns this year. I mean, when you're on a team with arguably another first round wide receiver on your team as well, man. I mean, it's hard to get enough pass catches to get the ball that many times and to have that much production at the same time, right? But that also then does help because you have somebody else who's they're not able to always shift the defense your way, right? Yeah. So it does provide to open things up. But I think that he reminds me, and before you even get to it, I'm just going to say he does remind me a lot of Jamar Chase and his explosion, because once the ball is in his hands, man, I mean, he will house anything if you give him just a sliver of space, right? He is a 20-yard in or a 10-yard slant, 80-yard touchdown type of guy. And I think that for him, getting into an offense where he can where you're going to have quarterbacks who need somebody to get the ball out to pretty quickly. Maybe you have a team where they have a younger quarterback and they're still kind of working on their understanding of progressions, but sometimes you just need to make it play and make something happen. He's a make it happen kind of guy. And again, he is electric too. He does have that same punt return ability. He does. He didn't. I noticed he didn't do as much for LSU towards the end there, obviously because of his production of what he was doing. But he clearly can do that. But I think that he's going to be. He can be a Jamar Chase type of player, and depending on where he falls, it's gonna determine how I think he does. But if he can find himself falling into the hands of a good team or a team that might need an explosive player, somebody who's maybe a little bit lower but needs to move up. Who's to say a Buffalo couldn't move up? The Chargers could move up. I know Buffalo's a long swing, but I mean, we've seen them. They've emptied that wide receiver room, and now they've got his Jalil Shakir from Boise State. So he's kind of number one top dog in there. I think that they could probably use somebody in the door as well. So it'll be interesting to see where it lands.
Yeah, they might have a better shot. One of these guys that we're going to talk about here in the next couple picks. Because I don't think that the Bills are at 28. They don't have the juice to go up to 5 or 6.
No.
It's definitely a dream.
I have a question.
It's a hopeful dream, I think. And so
on Nabers too, and this sort of just popped into my head. Obviously, being in the SEC, he's probably faced off against some higher end cornerbacks, DBs, safeties, things like that. Are there any guys that he went up against where he really struggled? Maybe he was against a Kool-Aid or something like that, off the top of your head, or is it just green light central? Like, what? Any bad games that worry you? I know we're nitpicking, but just curious.
Well, I mean, obviously, he had a little bit of tough time. I believe it was that might have been 2 years ago, but he did have a little bit of tough time with Georgia there. I believe that was 2 years ago. So he wasn't necessarily, Jaden Daniels wasn't necessarily in the place that he was. But this last year, Kool-Aid did give him some fits, right? But they did end up, actually having a pretty good game when you go back and look at it. I mean, he was going up against him, Terry and Arnold, was able to get over the top of them a couple of different times. The game came down to the wire. So I think that, for him, SEC competition wasn't necessarily holding him back from being, top 10, top flight receiver. Now at times I think that he can, they can send him on go balls, and there's times where maybe he doesn't want to perform the entire route tree, but he can completely. He sometimes just wants to use that natural speed to get over the top, and so that got him into trouble sometimes. But overall, I didn't see one specific person who really took him out.
I just looked it up. The Alabama game, he went off for 10 for 170.
Right, touchdown. Exactly.
Yeah,
right.
Okay.
I mean, he was
so much for Kool-Aid.
Yeah, it was right. I mean, I could envision it right now. I'm just thinking in I'm like, oh man, it's a brutal day for this guy right now. But
I would be interested to see his snap breakdowns against difficult corners, in terms of when he plays on the perimeter versus when he plays in the slot. Because Nabers, his size and athleticism also obviously allows him to move around the formation a lot, and that's something that I think is very valuable as a number one wide receiver. It gives me makes me think of CeeDee Lamb, right? Who moves from the perimeter into the slot and plays, roughly 30 to 40% of his snaps from the slot, which is not something you see from a number one wide receiver all the time. So if he is going to do that, I think the Chargers are a really good fit, right? They don't have a lot in terms of slot production at all. It's not like they have an established slot receiver that can't be pushed to the outside, right? They got Palmer and Quentin Johnston, who are both kind of outside receivers that aren't going to keep anybody like Malik Nabers off the field. But Nabers' ability to come in and play 40% in the slot would make it so the Chargers don't have to go and fill that position after the draft. I think he's they obviously want Marvin Harrison, right? I mean, Marvin Harrison is a head above these guys, but I think Malik Nabers is a very seamless and a very with the Chargers, and if they do decide to stay, even if Marvin Harrison gets picked at 4, right? I think that they probably will trade back. Somebody's going to come up to that 5 spot and take McCarthy. But if they do stay, getting Malik Nabers, I think, would be a very good move for the Chargers. So I'm hopeful that they take one of these guys. I still think trading down is very much, especially with the Vikings who have 2 first-round picks. Chargers have tackle needs. Maybe at 23 they'd be able to get a different one of these receivers that we'll talk about. But I think Nabers being in the slot, maybe avoiding guys like Kool-Aid, right, and helping his development into the NFL, right, where he can kind of, if he's going to be going up against Sauce Gardner, if he's going to be going up against some of these better corners on the outside, being able to have some of his production come from the slot, I think will really help his transition to the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. And he can, I think his versatility is great for him. He's just got to find the right team, right person getting the ball. It will be interesting to see, with all of that talk, to see where Brock Bowers lands. I don't want to get too outside of ourselves here. I know it's a wide receiver topic, but it's going to be interesting to see where he lands and how that affects where wide receivers go after him, right? Depending on what team decides they want to pull the trigger on the tight end. Because I
expect him to go to the Jets.
Right. I think that's a great call. I think that's something that they need. Aaron needs that type of player, and he's easily, probably the most seamless plug and play guy I've seen, right? As soon as he stepped into Georgia, he was, arguably the best receiver on the team.
So. And you probably didn't hear our conversation about Bowers during the mock draft, but we were talking about how concerning his size was after the picture he took next to Gronk. But we did say he's 6'4", 240 or whatever his size, something close to that. And so to stand next to Gronk and look tiny is just because Gronk is so huge. But right. Yeah. So all right, so let's go down to number 4, and I'm thinking.
Coming out of high school, but still didn't necessarily have the same production that he had before. Had obviously made some plays, but this year he just completely popped out. I think he's a true outside guy. Tall, lanky frame, but great separator and a really great end zone pass catcher. That's one thing I noticed. I didn't have the chance to watch every single LSU game, but one thing I always noticed about Brian Thomas when I did have those games on was that the guy seemed to always be making catches in the end zone. And then you see it, and this guy, here he is, 17 touchdowns in one season. 17 touchdowns. Right. Yeah. Scores it, catches it, right? His game, you look back at the game this year against Ole Miss, and, while Malik Nabers was also doing his thing, Brian Thomas was arguably the best receiver on the field that day for LSU. And so, when I think of Brian Thomas and I think about, kind of where he fits, I do think that he doesn't have the versatility that you might see from Malik or Rome, but he's still got the blazing speed, a 4'3" guy, right? Just shade over 6'3", 6'4", and a tremendous ability to go up and get the ball. So he really does remind me a lot of a T. Higgins in the way that his frame is built out, the way that he's lanky, the way that he's able to go and really be the guy that you look for, quarterback's best friend in the red zone. So I think that, for him, again, it's going to be he's probably going to move down a little bit farther down into the draft. But if he lands with a team that has a need for a number one outside wide receiver, I think that by either his first or second year, he'll be a really quality wide receiver in the NFL. Now, I don't know if he necessarily has the ability to maybe just jump on the scene as much as you see from Malik Nabers or from a Rome Odunze, Marvin Harrison, and that's only because I think there's still some building that he can do on some of his more medium route concepts that he runs on the route tree. He is a little bit taller, right? So sometimes, having that hip mobility is it's a little bit tougher for the tall guys, right?
Yeah.
So
longer levers.
Yeah. Right. So it's just, finding the right team. I think he has the ability to really be a special player. I think all four of these guys that we've really talked about are really the cream of the crop when it comes to this year's wide receiver draft class. And I think that for Brian Thomas Jr., I'm not sure that he might pop right away, but if you do give him enough time, I do think that he's got a little bit more in the tank and a little bit more to bring to the team than, say, unfortunately for Matt, Quentin Johnson. While I did like Quentin, he's a real tall guy, but I think Brian is definitely a little bit more polished in his route tree. He has the ability to really just be an outside guy who can help you win some of those 50-50 throw balls when you got a third and long, third and 15 plus, and you need somebody to go high on a nice post route, maybe to get you over that hump. He's a big target, somebody that quarterbacks can count on to be in the right space, and he does have the ability, again, to separate with the 4.3 speed. But I do think that going in for the NFL, his money is going to be made at the go for it, take a shot, range of about 35, 40 yards going in, right? Looking for a guy who can get over the top, big target, and can go up and catch that ball at its highest point. And I think for him, it's just really about landing spot.
Something.
It seems like the ceiling is really high with him. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The feeling I get with him when we're talking about the speed, size, deep ball needs to develop maybe a little bit size wise, need to develop a little bit route tree wise.
Mm-hmm.
Reminds me of Mike Williams, right?
Mm-hmm.
When the Chargers just got right, he's just signed with the Jets. I think he, Williams might be a little bit taller, maybe a little bit bigger at this point, but something that Thomas size wise can grow into and hopefully develop the route tree. I know you mentioned Quentin Johnston, right? The big guy in the draft last year, right? So like maybe scare people off of Brian Thomas a little bit, right? Maybe not let the hype get out of control. But I think, like you said, I learned the value of the looking into the route tree and the win rates with Quentin Johnston, because I was obviously really high on him. Thought, big outside receiver, really good college production, but what I didn't look into is all of it came on the right side of the field, and all of it came on in-breaking routes, right? Like a scout at the NFL level can figure that out. And he couldn't catch the ball over his shoulder. He couldn't play on the left side of the field. So he has a lot of development to take on in the NFL. And I don't think that's something that's as big of a concern with Brian Thomas. So I hope his entrance into the NFL is a little bit more seamless than Quentin Johnston's was this past year. Where do you want where would you want to see him land? He's somebody that is very variable in terms of mock drafts or who's looking for a receiver. You see him all the way up at 12. Like if Arizona trades down out of 4 and they get that 12th pick from the Vikings, maybe he goes there. We've seen him as low as 28 down to the Bills, which I don't think is going to happen. I think if the Bills want him, they're going to have to trade up and go get him. The Bengals might have a need at receiver. They're sitting at 18. So where would you think that he could possibly go?
Yeah, I do see it depends on what happens with Cincinnati and what comes of the T. Higgins situation. Obviously, they're franchise tagging him right now, and we know that he's not very happy with that. So if that ends up being a situation where they do move on from T. Higgins, I think that would be a great fit for him. That's exactly where I kind of had him slotted. I'm not sure, but just kind of the rumblings, I do see T. Higgins possibly looking or requesting his way out of Cincinnati, unfortunately. But at the same time, I think that, you get into Brian Thomas Jr., same body type. same great production that he's had from LSU, could kind of fit into that role right on the other side of Jamar Chase. And then again, you've got an LSU connection going on there, right, with all three of those guys if they were in there. And again, Buffalo would also be a great place for him. Obviously, they're in dire receiver needs, but as you said, 28. I don't know if they're going to be if they're going to want to use as much capital as they need to even move up to get to him. So they might have to try their luck a little bit further down the wide receiver draft board. But yeah, Cincinnati it's kind of where I think he could find himself a home, but we'll see what happens with T. Higgins.
All right. Sounds good on Brian Thomas. So I think we all agree on the top 4 tier there.
Mm-hmm.
We all had those 4 guys in. We had Rome and Malik maybe flipped, but those guys are probably going to go 1 or 2 picks apart, and it's going to end up depending on what the teams want. So going down from 5 to 10, maybe we can move this along a little bit faster. We got into the meat of the conversation here up at top, right? That's what people want to hear. That's what we want to talk about. So as we get down into these other guys, maybe focus on the rankings, compare them to other guys that are around them, and maybe we'll go like 5 minutes on each guy type of thing and wrap this up. So let's jump into number 5.
Yeah, so number 5, I know my list is probably just a little bit different, but I actually had Troy Franklin from the Oregon Ducks, fellow Bay Area native as myself. So proud of him for that. Proud of everything he's accomplished. But really looking at Troy, over the last 2 years, he's been Oregon's best receiver, top 10 team, and his production has stood on that. This last year, 81 catches, 1,300 yards. 14 touchdowns, and a pretty stacked and loaded Oregon wide receiver room, even though you might not have seen as much production now from some of the other guys that they had on their team. I did know that they had Bo Nix's brother come on pretty well there, was Foster brother he took on, and he came into the slot, so there's some pretty high production on that side. But the thing that I love about Troy, and the thing that I think just shows up on film again and again and again, is that he's always open, and he seems to be a big playmaker at the end of the day. And I know some of the people were scared off. Unfortunately, his 40 wasn't exactly where we thought it would land, right? And I thought he was more of a 4.3 burner. But again, I also do like to trust my film and watch tape on these guys. And the thing that Troy consistently shows up doing is he's hitting 60-yard, 50-yard touchdowns week after week after week, right? And so for a team that needs somebody to go out there who's seasoned, he's been in that wide receiver room playing since he was a freshman at Oregon, which is no easy task. He's clearly a quick learner. And when he does get the ball in his hands, he has the ability to go the distance. And I've rarely seen anybody catch him on film, so I'm not too worried that the 40 is going to be something that maybe maybe something that's going to hinder him once he gets to the NFL. I think that maybe he's just a little bit more of a long strider or plays at a better football speed. But I do like Troy. I like his production. I think he's a player that you could see finding his way down lower into the draft, maybe even coming up as a secondary. But early in the second round. But for Troy, I think what stands out to me more than anything, again, is that deep ball ability to go out. Now, he's not necessarily a go up and get it guy, but he is a go out and run under type of guy. And so that's what I've always really liked from him. I like the production. He's got a great body size. He could use a little bit more weight and size on him, and I'm sure that getting into the NFL weight room training program will definitely help that. I know that, with him being on the Oregon Ducks and, them having kind of a long season, trying to get into that final game and get into the playoff scenario, there's just more time that comes with that when you're playing in those games. And so his ability to get ready for the draft might have been hindered by a couple of weeks due to that long process, but I'm glad he was able to finish it out with his team. And so I'm hoping that once he does get into the NFL locker room, if a team needs somebody to go out and get a ball, he could find himself, working with, say, maybe somebody like Tua down in Miami, though. I know that they have some other needs, right? But it would be great for him to get with, say, a speedster get with a speedster like Hill and see if he can teach him some of the ropes as far as running his routes and get him in a better spot to be really successful.
Yeah. So I had Franklin down at 10 on my list. So quite a bit different here because I think there's going to be multiple different receivers that go in front of him. But my main concern and the main reason I have that is because of his physicality. I mean, I know Devontae Smith kind of broke the mold when 170, 180 pound receivers come into the league, but he's like 175 pounds, maybe, you know, like when he's wet type of thing, and maybe with his cleats on. So I think, you know, with not showing, like, I don't know, he ran a 4.41, so it's not exactly like he ran slow, you know. And you know, he was a couple ticks away from flashing 4.3, and even if it was high 4.3. So I think the athleticism and the speed, it's going to be fine. I just think the physicality part of it, and if he is going to be running deep routes, like contested catches on the sideline, like if he's going to be pushing outside and that's going to be his role, I think he might have some growing pains here in the NFL, and he's going to need to learn how to separate. And he's going to need to learn how to, you know, gain space against man coverage in particular, to be able to reach his ceiling and be as successful as he can. So I think he's obviously a very good player, but overall, I think the size just is going to end up holding him back.
Yeah, I hear you, and I think those are all just great concerns, and they're frankly really fair. No pun intended, but he, you know, Troy. I think that what again stood out to me was again just the consistent productivity. And I know we're trying to project them into the NFL, and for Troy, that size is definitely going to have to increase, right? It's just a factor that, you know, though we've seen success of guys like Tank Dell, right? And I still believe that Josh Downs has something to offer there in Indianapolis, so we'll see how that goes. And I think that the ability for receiver, the flexibility and kind of freedom that receivers have when they're running their routes today, the lack of ability to touch them really after a certain point really helps guys like a Troy Franklin, right? So at that point,
which is definitely true. You know, like this guy his size didn't used to be able to play in the NFL at all.
Yeah,
no literally way. Wouldn't even be drafted because of his size. But now in today's game, it's definitely something that's more overcomable. I'm still concerned about it as going to be, you know, one of the smallest receivers weight wise in the entire league. So
I had some of the same concerns as you, Trevor. I think, you know, for him, you know, if you're drafting a guy first round, like, to me, he needs to have, you know, number one potential. I don't necessarily see that with Franklin. I do worry that if he's in the wrong situation, he could really just kind of get lost and push down. But, you know, I never thought about Miami. I know it's fun to think, but you're right. I mean, if you can, I don't want to say manufacture touches, but, you know, if you get him in the open field, you know, I was really surprised by the 40 time. Usually I'm not super into that, but I think with his weight, I think that's going to really hurt him in terms of draft profile. But yeah, we'll see. Yeah, because I think I had him at 9 or 10 too. But, you know, that is interesting.
Right. Yeah, because it's tough because you again, you know, we all harp on, we've seen the big plays, but you know, the 40, the low, the lackluster 40, it's like, well, are you a real burner or are you not? But again, when watching the film, you don't see very many people catch him, and it's not like he's playing against necessarily all the slow guys in the world. So there's something to be said about that. Football speed is a real thing in some ways.
Yeah. And the Dolphins is an interesting one, right? Because the Dolphins have pick 55, right? So they're going to be towards, not at the end, but towards the end of the second round. And these guys that we're going to be talking about, like, there's a chance that 8 of them are gone or 7 of them are gone. And if that's the Dolphins guy that they want to go get, you know, that could be an interesting to replace the, you know, Claypool or the, I'm blanking 3 receiver, but
Craycraft.
Kind of, Craycraft. I thought that was their 4. Who's the guy that plays them?
I thought it was the guy who went to the Patriots. I'm trying to remember his name. He's kind of a long, tall, lanky guy. I feel like he went to the Patriots, and then
Devontae Parker is probably
Devontae Parker.
That was a while ago though.
That was a while ago.
I think Parker's been on the Patriots for a couple of years now. But it would be interesting to see somebody with some speed join the Dolphins, you know, and that is a realistic landing spot after looking at kind of how the draft might play out here. So
All right,
number 6, Ken. Who's that?
Okay. All right. So again, just a little bit different, but for me, who I really like here is Ladd McConkey. And the reason why I know that this is a little bit outside, but Ladd over the last 3 years has arguably been, Georgia's number one, number two receiver behind Brock Bowers, right? Which is no easy task because, coming out of high school, this guy was Georgia's last recruit, last pickup that they had in their 2021 class. And over that time, 2020, I believe 2020 class. And over that time, he's been nothing but productive for them. And basically their top go-to receiver. And the thing that really kind of stood out for me, guys, outside of everything that he's put onto tape, right? I know he was a little bit hurt and banged up this last year for Georgia. So production wasn't there, over 3 years, 120 catches, 1,700 yards, 14 touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns over these last 3 years for Georgia. But I got a chance to just watch a lot of the Senior Bowl and see him work and see a lot of the receivers running routes at that event. And the one thing that kept coming up, and I heard about Ladd, was that, day after day against some of the top DBs that he was working against, he was consistently open and consistently making plays throughout that entire event. And I've also seen that, with him going against that SEC competition in those biggest games that he was playing in, he always seemed to find a way to show up for his team, and it would whether it was making a big play down the sidelines, running a reverse, or even fielding punts. He's always had some flexibility to him and an ability to show up for his team in big games. And so for me, I think he's a great fit as a slot receiver in the NFL, and he can be a go-to pass catcher for a team as long as he can stay healthy or relatively healthy. And I know he was pretty healthy over Georgia, but this last year I know he dealt with some foot problems, some things like that. So I think that for Ladd, he's clearly he's still really raw, and even in his development, because he's only been playing the position of wide receiver for the last 3 years. Before that, while he was in high school, he was predominantly a quarterback / do-it-all type of guy. And so I think for him, he still has some learning he can do as far as running different routes in his route tree. But I think he's quick enough and twitchy enough to get in and out of breaks and to find his way in through zone defenses and sit down in pockets and make big plays for his quarterbacks and really be a safety net, right? I don't want to go with the stereotypical, the white slot guy, wide receiver here in the NFL, but hey, he does fit that mold, but he's really, really athletic. I think you saw the play, the end around reverse against Florida State in the Sugar Bowl, and, he had a chance. That was really an improv play on his part. It was supposed to be a double receiver pass or a double pass to his tight end. And the guy realizes it's not there and tucks his head down, jukes one of the Florida State players out of his shoes, out of his brand new Nike cleats, and takes it to the house. And I was like, wow, man. These are no scrubs that he's doing this against.
Yeah.
He's always showing up for big plays. It takes me back to his game against Tennessee. Last year with Georgia, when they were kind of coming down to the wire, Tennessee was obviously on a roll, and then, Georgia had a chance to go in there and flex some muscle. And during that last quarter, I think he put up 80 yards to basically help Georgia close out that game, 2 touchdowns as well. So really proud of what Ladd's been able to accomplish and his kind of underdog story that he's had while he's been at Georgia, but the fact that he's been able to find and fill out that starting role for them over these last couple of years, going up against again, first round, second round, third round DBs all over the place, and consistently be a starter for that team, just I think proves a lot about who he is, his mentality, and how he's going to walk into an NFL locker room when he's not necessarily the biggest guy, might not be the fastest, but does have all the tools, much like a Hunter Renfrow. Again, not to stereotype.
Oh God, don't compare him to Hunter Renfrow.
Let's list them all. Danny Woodhead.
Let's get in there. Let's get into it. Danny Amendola.
Oh God, let's give Ladd a little more credit than that. He did run a 4.39, right? That would have been like the fastest, not the fastest, but it would have been one of the fastest marks for a top end receiver in last year's class. Like all those guys were running 4.5s, right? So a couple 4.4s, but like the guys at the top of that would have made a list like this, and he's got a 4.39 speed. So he's got enough speed, I think, to keep, like, if he is going to play in the slot, to keep DBs honest and be able to open up space for him to operate. Because I think the concern is going to be against press coverage is that, you know, is
Mhm.
he going to be strong enough? Is he going to be big enough inside there against those corners to be able to open up enough room and stay on time in his routes? I think that's his biggest question mark in terms of his NFL projectability. But with the speed, right? If they have to worry about the speed and they're going to be playing press coverage and giving up any sort of over the top throws or seam route throws to him, I think he's got a chance to be an impact player right away, like right out of the gate. And I think, you know, the speed isn't like top end, but it's a lot better than Hunter Renfrow. It's a lot better
Yeah,
than Danny Amendola.
absolutely.
It's a lot better
Yeah.
than Julian Edelman. Even like the speed is a different element to his game that these other guys that
Mhm.
we've seen play
Yeah.
that role just didn't have, you know.
Right.
So I think he has. I'm much higher on him than I am on Franklin. I think that he's got a shot because, you know, Franklin's going to be playing outside and has these size concerns, right? Ladd's going to be playing in the slot most likely most of his snaps, and he's got the speed and he's, you know, he's not huge, but he's 190 for a 6-foot
Yeah.
frame. I think his game might translate to somebody who needs a slot receiver really well. I mean, like say he were to go to the Eagles, for example, right? Like they don't have a slot receiver. They do have Goddard, right? So they kind of have three pass catching, but if he goes in and fills a role on a good offense like that, you know, that could make them even more dangerous and add an element to their offense even more that they need. So, yeah, I like him quite a bit. I think I ranked him 6, and I think we're going to get into my 5th ranked player next. But I think he's going to be a day 2 pick, right? I think he's going to go in the second round. But I think somebody is going to be very happy to have gotten a receiver like him where they are going to get him.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I was just very impressed by Ladd overall. And I think that again, he's kind of got that dog mentality. He's very shifty. And I'm glad that you mentioned the 6'1", 190. He is built. He is built.
Mm-hmm.
He's not necessarily just a small guy. He's, you know, oftentimes he might even be on the higher side of 6 foot. So I think that's great. And he's got the tools to get in there, get to work right away. The Eagles would be a great landing spot for him, definitely.
Yeah, and he can move. And like the other thing too that I think could happen, right? If the Chargers end up trading down with the Vikings who come up to get McCarthy and they get 11 and 23 and they don't end up getting, you know, one of the top 3 at 11 and they miss on Brian Johnson, Brian Thomas at 23, right? And they don't force that pick. They take a tackle, they take a defensive end. And at 35 or 37 is their second round pick. Ladd is a good option for them because they just lost Keenan Allen, right? They don't have any weapons. It would make a lot of sense for them to take a slot receiver like Ladd here and then maybe try and build on the outside in the 3rd or 4th round. So I think you know, it'll be interesting to see, you know, where in the second round he goes, but I fully expect him to be taken by one of these teams relatively early in the second round.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. I think he's a perfect safety net. He would really fit well at San Diego if he can.
All right.
All
on
right.
to 7.
Yeah, so 7. We're gonna go with you know, the Flash himself, Xavier Worthy. I mean, I think we all know where to start when it comes to Xavier Worthy and his overall speed. No question marks there, but more so than that, you know, I think that oftentimes, you know, we've seen Xavier Worthy on the field, and there's been points in different games I've watched over these years where you would have hoped for just a little bit more out of him. But he is a big playmaker, and he is a talented receiver. He's not just a burner all by himself, right? He definitely has the ability to go up and get the ball. We saw it in several games, and I think, you know, over these last years, I thought his production would have been just a little bit higher, but overall, he's still, you know, was one of the top receivers on one of the best teams in the country. And the reason for that is, you know, he has the ability to run past anybody and everybody that's in front of him at any time on the field, right? But he's also quick enough to where if he runs a hitch and you're not on top of him and you miss one tackle, he's also out of there, right? I mean, we saw it happen early in his career when he was playing in the Red River rivalry, you know, just a quick swing route and 80 yards on I think it was the second play of the game. He took that thing to the house, and he was only a freshman at that time, probably soaking wet 160. And again, he's not going to be your biggest guy, but he is in fact the biggest burner on that. He's the biggest burner in this draft class. And speed kills. So, I mean, I know that there's been a lot of people projecting him to go to, say, Kansas City. But I also think that, you know, for for him, one of the things that we talked about there, Trevor, if there was a way for him to maybe fall down into, say, an Eagles spot, right, land with the Eagles, or maybe even deeper down with the Cowboys, those teams need, while they have great receivers on the outside and they obviously have great talented receivers on both teams, they don't necessarily have guys who are burners who take them over the top. Now, they don't always have to, because their guys win it, 50-50 ball anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And
their offensive coordinator never ran them over the middle either. So
right.
just sending them both down the sideline with nothing over the middle at all, no play action. It's just terrible offense.
And when you have, when you have AJ on your team, do you necessarily need to outrun anybody? You can't even stay on top of him. I mean, the guy's built like a linebacker anyway, so he doesn't have to get over you. He just needs to be 1 foot on top of you, and you're out of it anyways. But the reason why I like Xavier again is really just the speed and his ability to go over the top of teams. I think that a lot of teams are looking for that as they go, kind of make the next phase of finding receivers that might not necessarily be your go-to big body catch receivers, and receivers that can just get open, get in and out of breaks really, really quickly, and find ways to do something once the ball is in their hand. So I think for Xavier, he's got to find a team that can really utilize his skill set of getting over the top. And again, I had him down with, I didn't see him necessarily falling into the first round. And you have the Bills all the way down there at 28, but they really do need some sort of burner, because they also want to be able to utilize Josh Allen's arm, and that person also needs to be able to catch the ball, in crucial times. And that's one thing, though, that with Xavier, if I did have a concern about him, there were just far too many drops over these last 2 years, I think. So he definitely needs to get into the gym, get to working with the ball machine to really kind of shore that up. But overall, I think that he's going to be a tremendous fit in the NFL, and there's nothing that you can do with that speed, and it can't be taught. So I think for him, finding a good team that can utilize that, can allow him to go get over the top. Maybe not necessarily your under cover 2 type of guy, but your post corner, post type of guy. Maybe deep digs, deep outs is probably where he's going to make his money.
Yeah, one word on where I want Xavier to land: the Chiefs. Oh, I guess that's 2 words since I said but Chiefs, right? Like I really think that he's an ideal fit, and I think that the Chiefs might trade out of 32, right? Somebody might come up and try and take a quarterback, right? Like if Bo Nix is still there, if they're interested in that, right? Kind of like what happened with Lamar Jackson. There's always that possibility, but if the Chiefs decide to stick at 23 and they take Worthy, I think that would be just an ideal fit, and I would be very excited for that.
Right. I mean, still, this last year, we talked about the drop balls, but 75 catches, 1,000 yards. I would have loved to see a couple more touchdowns, but Texas was really a bully team this year. As much as there's a lot of hype around Quinn Ewers, and them having Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell, and then they're tied in there, Tavian Sanders, right? So there's a lot of real playmakers on that team, but he still was able to find his way over 1,000 yards this year. Still be very active. He is a little bit taller than, say, your lad. He's a 6'1" guy, right? So he does have some height to him. He's really explosive. We saw that in a couple of different games. Yeah, he's 6'1" actually. He's just a little.
He's listed. Is he listed at 5'11"?
Was he listed at 5'11"? I thought about.
I think so, because I think Adonai Mitchell is listed at 6'1".
Check the combine.
Yeah, probably go back to the combine.
Yeah, because Adonai Mitchell, we're going to get into.
Yeah,
they listed him at like 6'3", and I think they clocked him at like 6'1" at the combine or something. So Texas
6'1" is what I thought I saw at
Adonai. So Texas has been doing their roster upgrading,
padding their stats.
Inflation into the height,
They did. You're right. They did have him 5'11", 3/4. So he's a little under 6 foot, 6'1" in cleats then. Uh,
Yeah, there you go. That's probably how they measured them for their
Yeah, right.
for their Texas roster measurements. Yeah.
yeah.
Put your cleats and stand on the balls of your feet and balls of your toes.
Yeah, not to make it too long with it, but I just wanted something about the Chiefs. I mean, obviously we know the really unfortunate situation that happened
Rashee Rice.
with Rashid Rice.
Yeah.
And we don't know what's going to come of that. Now, thankfully, nobody was truly hurt in that situation, but it's still a bad situation. And so I think for the Chiefs, the Chiefs aren't going to skip on looking and taking all precautions that are necessary, and they'll do what they need to do to make sure that they get somebody to work with Mahomes.
And I think Worthy too fills the spot that Valdez-Scantling left, right? Because MVS is now not on the team, right? That's a deep ball. And even if Worthy isn't going to be the most productive player right away, that gives the Chiefs an element that helps them open up their offense as a whole, right? And that's currently something, Marquise Brown, I guess, is a burner too, and he can fill that role. But I think Marquise Brown is a better overall receiver than that, right? He can be a number one versus there's the deep threat in getting Worthy here, and there's just a lot of value in that for the Chiefs offense. So I think that's why I would hope that he would go there, and maybe obviously, it might be reaching a little bit to take him in the first round, so they could go a different direction. But I just think that would be fun for the sake of conversation.
Right.
All right, let's get in the next guy on your list here. Then at number 8, we got 3 guys left.
Yeah, absolutely. So Adonai Mitchell, aka AD Mitchell, of Texas and formerly of Georgia. I think this is probably the hardest person I had to evaluate during this whole process, and just trying to go back and really watch his film and kind of get a better feel for him and understand who he is, because the guy has all the talent in the world. He's out of Missouri. He's out of the Houston area. He's a Texas guy through and through. And over the last year, he kind of was their number one receiver when it came to throwing the ball to in the end zone. I really like his play. He's always been a really crisp route runner, even when he was at Georgia. I think that's a great thing for him. He's not necessarily always burning you deep. As we see, 55 receptions, 845 yards, but 11 touchdowns. It's that when he does run his routes, he's a great 50-50 ball catcher, and he's when he does separate, he separates quickly and he's open for a period of time. So you just need the quarterback to get him the ball at that right time. If you're late, there's a possibility for receivers to get back to him. And I know he has great speed. He's not slow by any means, but just kind of what I've seen him put on film. And, one thing that it takes me back to about Adonai, where I feel like there's a chance for him to end up being, a top receiver on a team's number one and number two receiver. Maybe not initially when he walks in the door, but definitely over the next 2 to 3 years. And the reason why I feel that way about him is because even when he was on Georgia, even when he was on Texas, he always kind of was the receiver that everybody was talking about and the guy that they were going to in their biggest moments. And you look at, Texas even losing that game against Washington. I mean, the last play of the game, they have a chance to go in there, tie it up, get it going. And who did they look to go to? They go on basically a fade route to Adonai Mitchell, right? And unfortunately, just barely missed him, truthfully. And that says something when they have an Xavier Worthy, they don't try to get him on a rub route or something like that where it frees him up a little bit more. So I think he's probably the hardest person to evaluate, but I think that his production, his ability to just run really crisp, like in slant routes, is something that could be really good for him. He reminds me a lot in his body motion. I'm not going to say in his production, but he does remind me a lot of CeeDee Lamb when I see him on the field, right? Like I just see them together, their body types. I know them. I'm not saying on the production side, I'm going to give him CeeDee Lamb-ish. I'm just saying the way in which he moves and the way he goes about running his routes, they just seem very similar in the way that CeeDee used to look. I used to watch a lot of CeeDee. I was a big Kyler fan at the time, and I just see a lot of the similar movement. So if he can somehow find his way to polish himself into becoming a more refined wide receiver once he gets into the NFL, the sky is the limit for him. I mean, again, he's got all the talent. He's got the speed. He can jump out the gym. He is an athletic freak. And if he gets into the right spot where maybe he doesn't have to be, number one guy right away, which I highly doubt that he will be, depending no matter which locker room he walks into. He's going to have to do some learning, get on a learning curve. I think that he can be a really productive and successful wide receiver.
Yeah,
I agree with you on the
Yeah.
potential for a number one and the upside. I think something that I struggled with him, watching the film is like, he doesn't seem to play as fast to me as his 40 time and, effort concerns. He's talked about saving himself on routes and things like that. But the biggest thing was just sort of looking at his stats. And I understand they obviously have a lot of playmakers on Texas, but like, he didn't put up big numbers by any means. Like, I think he was averaging like 4 catches a game, like 800 yards on the season. And you talk about like a CD comparison where it's like, obviously you're projecting upside, but he was like, what, a 1,400-yard guy at Oklahoma. And, Quinn Ewers was, I know he has his flaws, but, he was like, what, the highest quarterback prospect ever in the same class as Caleb Williams, too. Like, I don't know. I do have some concerns. And, I know you have him at 8, so obviously you have your concerns, too, when consensus is usually around 5 or 6. So I guess I'm just sort of adding, fuel to that fire. But, to me, that's kind of what stood out.
Yeah. See, I had him up at 5. And the reason I have him up at 5 is the size. Obviously you guys are talking about things like intensity and how into it seems like he can be. Is he going to develop, like, how much urgency he was playing with? I think those are types of things that can be coached, right? He's got the 4.34 speed. He's got the 6'2", 205. Like, he's got the size and the speed to be a number one, and he plays outside. And like you said, he's got the big time play abilities. Who they're looking to in critical points of the game was him at Texas. And Kenny, I have something I want to pose to you, because I project, or I have this feeling anyways, that he's going to get picked at 28 by the Bills. And you said you don't know necessarily if he can be the one right away, but if he goes into that situation, he's going to be the one right away. They have nobody else currently on the team in the wide receiver room. So, I mean, unless you're going to say, Curtis Samuel is going to be the number one, right? I mean, he could garner targets early, kind of like he does every year, but like, that's going to fade, and Mitchell is going to have to take over and could anyways be a pivotal piece on a offense that has aspirations to go further in the playoffs, not start to rebuild. So what do you think about him possibly going there, and about him being the one of these 5 guys that we're talking about here, be also joining the first round?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that would necessarily be the best landing spot for him. Now, the thing that we do have to wait on is kind of see, I don't know if Buffalo is going to make any moves, but there is a Brandon Ayuk component that is out there that's still kind of, we're waiting to see what happens. And there's been some rumors about maybe that the Bills are going to make a push towards Brandon Ayuk, and that could be where they're leaning, right? And when you look at
giving up Brandon Ayuk.
Yeah.
That's not happening. That might be a dream on, a Bills dream, but I don't even think the 49ers would give up Ayuk for that pick. Yeah, like Ayuk and Debo, it's nice for them to try and leverage, in the public that, they want money, and they, trades could be happening, but those two aren't going anywhere. They're
I don't see that either. Brandon Ayuk getting out of the door without his contract, and obviously so he's earned it. But for them, I mean, it seeing as that's the case, right? If he does fall into a Buffalo situation, it's just kind of tough because, again, like as Matt mentioned, he's kind of had this situation even at Texas and at Georgia where there just seems to be this reoccurring theme of sometimes he takes plays off, he's not necessarily fully engaged, or he gets a little frustrated when he's not getting the ball, right? Like we didn't even see that in the game against Washington, right? Where he kind of threw a little bit of his bit, telling him to throw him the ball. Now they threw him the ball and he did catch a touchdown. So I do want to give him credit.
He fits right in with the Bills, man. Just slide right into that Stephon Diggs role. It's perfect.
Right, exactly. So I mean, right. It would be interesting to see if he did fall into a spot like that. Where are you guys going to do? Because obviously they have Shakir, they have Curtis Samuel, all three, kind of slot guys. Obviously, AD is a little bit bigger, can definitely play the outside, but it's just I would see it being pretty tough for a team that, as long as they have Josh Allen, is in win now mode. And if the concerns that we're feeling, even with you having that 5, me having down here at 8, if those concerns are there, are you really trying to take on that guy and necessarily throw him in it and give him to Josh Allen and say, hey, go out and win with this, right? So I feel like that's going to be a tough sell for them. But if maybe they add, another free agent or somebody down the road, if there's teams that want to make a trade, something happens after the draft or during the draft, then anything could be possible there.
Yeah, and the thing about the Bills, the way they're constructed, right? Like you just said, all of their receivers on the roster are slot guys, so they can't really. Right. They're not really going to be in the market at 28 for a guy like Ladd, right? Who might be the better player overall, but the worst fit for the Bills. And I think that could end up leading to AD taking a chance on the size and the speed and the ability to be a number one guy, and then try and build around that on offense, with Curtis Samuel or whoever else they have in the slot. And then if they do sign somebody else, they can have them line up opposite of AD here. So that's the only reason I wanted to bring that up, is because I think that, at the end of the first round there, if the Bills are going to go receiver, looking at all of these guys, like he's the one that has the shot, in my opinion, to go at that pick to the Bills. So, all right, cool. So let's go down to 9. I'll let you guys debate this one out a little bit, because I was more aligned with having this next guy a little further down, but Matt has this guy all the way up at 5. So Kenny, I'll let you take it away, and then Matt, let you do a little bit of a rebuttal on this guy here.
Yeah. So I got at 9, we got Keon Coleman, kind of the breakout star of the season, from Florida State, by way of Michigan State and also by way of Louisiana. Keon Coleman, I mean, what's there to say? But the highlight plays definitely stick out. I think it's the first thing that comes into everybody's mind when they think of Keon Coleman. And unfortunately, the second part of that, when we're going through his draft analysis of where he could go, unfortunately, was the much to be desired 40 time, which was, I think, surprising to everybody, right? Definitely a lot slow. 4.61 in the 40, which is
slow.
That's really slow for a wide receiver, unfortunately. You would love to see it at least get down into the 4.5s, but hey, it is what it is. And
what about his go? Like, building off of this real quick, sorry to interrupt, but what did you think about that versus his gauntlet miles per hour? I thought that was a weird thing, because he was one of the slowest in the 40, and his miles per hour during the gauntlet was the highest of any receiver. And it was like, wait a second, how is that possible, right? So the game speed, maybe, I think, is something you were about to say. So I just wanted to highlight that with him here, that the 40 time might be lacking, but I think the gauntlet drill might have let him off the hook a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely. I mean, it definitely helped that he was that. Like, the gauntlet is, obviously, it's a test of how you just kind of run through the routes and your concentration, and is your ability to catch the ball. Are you able to just run and catch the ball while you're running? For some people, the reason why they slow down is they have a little bit of a jump or a hitch, and those things come up. So he's clearly got a pretty smooth, clear running style when it comes to, doing on the field type performances. And that's what you kind of saw with the gauntlet. But it was strange to me too, Trevor. Like, the 4.61 just was really surprising. Now, I mean, and clearly he does have the athleticism and the wide receiver talent that you need to see from an NFL wide receiver. He's got the size. He's all of 6'4", 215, right? Really just a big, strong guy who's great with 50-50 balls. It's really great in the end zone. He still found a way to be productive, not as productive as some of the other guys that we talked about. And I think that's when we look closer at the film, that's probably why, is because he wasn't as great of a separator when he came to some of the longer routes, or when it came to getting out of his breaks. He might have just been a tad bit slower, and that caused him not to be able to win some of those routes. But when it came time to kind of a shoving, pushing competition of brute strength, he clearly was there. By the way, he caught those fade routes over the season, and 11 touchdowns, nothing to to laugh at. 3 against, in the first game. I think that first game really kind of his breakout game in the season against LSU. He really kind of tore it up in that game with 3 touchdowns, just under 130 yards receiving, and against some pretty good competition. But again, LSU's defense was quite down this year, so maybe when we all look back on that, we kind of look at it with somewhat of a side eye. But he had a great game against Clemson too this year, and I thought that the thing that sticks out with Keon is, if you're looking for a guy, I don't think he's going to be touching anywhere near the slot. But if you need a guy who's just kind of a brawler, somebody who can kind of just go up, and you need somebody in the red zone who can maybe make a tough slant route or a tough fade route, he's going to be able to get you that. But when it comes to for the NFL, I think the first thing he's probably going to want to do, and I hope it doesn't feel lazy, but there are speed coaches out there that can help and work on some of those things that can help, with his explosion as far as just running routes. But I think he's got a couple of areas he's really got to work on, and that's his second level routes over the middle. I think he's really slow when it comes to his digs, and not really slow. Let me take that back. I don't want to just totally crush him on that side. I want to say that he can do a better job of just exploding out of those digs once he gets past that 10 to 15 yard mark, really driving inside and then leveraging his big body and frame to make those catches. And I think that's going to be a big deal for him. And then another part of it is just I think he can do a better job of just sitting in some of the zone coverage spots. Like I think when I was watching this film, some of the times where you saw him running, he would sometimes run into defenders as opposed to maybe settling down. And I think that comes with just, getting better and more controlled in his hip and his range of motion, and understanding, okay, if I can just sit down here, maybe I don't have to go and make the extraordinary play every time. But he does have tremendous hands, really strong hands, and has a really big body. I think he could be a great fit for maybe a more play action heavy, more longer route concept type team where he's got an ability to go out there, find a way to get open because the teams are obviously biting up on some of those run game play actions that we see, and then he's able to go and body people out maybe across the middle. So maybe he's not your guy, he's not your Jameis Williams over the top, but he is your 14-yard in that you can look for as a safety net, and he's going to run through the ball as we saw in his gauntlet drill.
Yeah, and I guess one of the rebuttals, that I was going to use was, the gauntlet drill, and to me, it just shows that he really trusts his hands, and when it's time to play the game, he just looks like a baller. And honestly, myself not knowing, the intricacies of defensive coverages and things like that, I just turn on the film and I see a guy he's just amazing. He's just a dog, and with the 40 time, I think one of the things that we've talked about over the years, Kenny, is like, he wasn't a track guy in high school. Like there are some intricacies to like figuring out the best way to sprint off the line that, he played basketball at Michigan State. Like that is the bluest of the blue blood programs. Like you're talking about a guy that's, really splitting his time between two major sports and major programs. And I just see someone like that, guys just aren't really built this way every day. And, even when he was on Michigan State, like he outperformed Jaden Reed. Like to me, it was interesting that they would throw him so many screens and manufacture a lot of touches because that doesn't really seem like his game. But to me, it's like they're putting the ball in his hands for that and punt returns. It shows that he's just, that's how they view him as a playmaker. And, I think, we're off on these rankings because this class is just, it's so absurd. And I'm excited to see where he goes. And, I've talked about it to, Baltimore too, and Lamar can scramble for 10 seconds and he can throw that jump ball. I think he could work, but yeah, man, I just see just a football player with this guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you that's a great piece and a great ad, especially the playing of basketball, right? He's just, he's probably more explosive in his bounce than he is just, turning over his feet and his running. And that's totally fine. I mean, he just, I'm really happy that you brought up Baltimore as well. Doesn't he just kind of fit the Raven mold of just a beast and a freak, kind of the Anquan Bolden of this thing going on here, right? he'll just dog you out once he gets out on the field. So I could easily see him fitting into that team, into that culture. And you're right. I mean, with the loss of OBJ this year, though, I don't know how great of a fit it was. It seemed like they had some success there. He could be a great fit for Lamar to go in there, kind of, like the Batman and Robin. When you look at their wide receivers, you've got your speed burger, then you've got Keon Coleman right there, a guy who can just brute strength, go out and win any 50-50 ball, and probably going to be able to jump higher than anybody on the team for the most part. So I really like that. That's actually a great fit. I'm glad you brought that up.
Cool. We're coming up against the clock, so why don't you throw us your number 10, and then maybe we'll round it out with a couple sleepers.
Yeah, absolutely. So coming in at 10 by way of Hawaii is Roman Wilson, man. Really proud of this guy. Stuck it out through Michigan, through some of the harder times, those couple of years, obviously with COVID, but tremendous production this last year. Was clearly the number one receiver on the national championship team, and doubled his pass catches this last year, going from about 25 to 50 or 48 catches, 12 touchdowns, right? Not necessarily another burner, but another kind of slot guy that I see being able to really work with teams. He's really kind of a heady, quick thinker when it comes to being on the field. There's a lot of plays where you saw J.J. McCarthy scrambling around, kind of looking for an open guy. Roman Wilson just seemed to always be in sync with his quarterback and knowing what he was thinking and where to go. And there's not enough to be said about the catch that he made against Ohio State this year, late the game to kind of ice it. That was a tremendous catch and took tremendous focus as it was about to be almost picked off. And so I think for him, he's got all the tools. He ran a 4.39 in his 40, so he's got good enough speed to play at the next level and be a constant contributor. I do think that even with 6 foot 192, he's got a good frame on him. I still would love to see just how he does just was running some of the quicker routes. Maybe if you can see how he does maybe on some more of the swing passes or quick hitch screens. Really didn't get to see much of that while he was at Michigan. I would love to know if there's a side of his game that can incorporate that, because you do see the 4.39 speed. So I'd love to see if he's a guy who can take off and go, but haven't seen too much of that. So Roman Wilson at number 10, and I still see a lot of things.
Do you think, just to add into there, I guess, where do you think he'll go? Because to me, I could really see Harbaugh wanting to bring this guy into the Chargers, and even if they address wide receiver at the top of the draft. I mean, they've got 2 4th-round picks. Are you thinking that late? Or are you thinking more of like a second or third? What do you think with this guy?
Well, for me with Rome, it's kind of funny when I was thinking about, where is he going to fit at? What team is he going to be on? With the Broncos kind of looking for a quarterback and needing somebody to come into the door there. Now, I know they gave away the draft capital. He could be down on the boards for them. But if you're looking to bring in a new quarterback, I feel like Roman Wilson, kind of I think his 5th-year senior at the Wolverines, a heady guy. He could be somewhat of a safety blanket for a team like the Denver Broncos, who need somebody to kind of pair with their young quarterback, whoever that's going to be for them. Or, I mean, if they really do decide, take that route. And he's kind of a smart guy who can fit in there, and I think he could learn the offense very quickly. He's got experience in an NFL type system. He's used to hard coaching, working with Harbaugh. So I feel like that's the team that when I thought about him, I thought that he's a great safety blanket for somebody who just needs a wide receiver who can probably just play, who can just play the position and can go out there and do some stuff with a quarterback to make it easier on them. And I feel like that's what he's going to be able to bring to the table. So that's kind of where I saw him fitting in, but we'll see.
All right. I like that. All right, throw us a couple deep sleepers. Something maybe not a 10, 11 type guy. Maybe someone that we don't even know of. Someone, I don't know, something fun. Throw us a couple guys.
Okay.
Like try and hit on Puka Nacua during this video. So when we go back and look, it's like, dude, who was that guy again?
I've got a screenshot text to Kenny a month before the season saying Puka is just going to be a problem, and I didn't draft him in fantasy, so I can't talk, but I've got the receipt.
hardly anybody did. So he was a 3rd round dynasty pick, So
Dude.
Jesus.
Oh, Puka Nakua. I mean, that guy is just a legend. But he was, I love Puka's story, but he was a 5-star coming out of high school. So let's not act like he was just totally unknown. But everybody, he was a legit 5-star. He transferred back to BYU to be closer to his family. So, but yeah, 2 guys I think that I really like on this board, and they're both going to be for me just SEC guys. The first one is Ricky Pearsall out of Florida. I really love this guy's game. Great slot receiver. I'd say like behind, if there's obviously, the Lad McConkey comparisons, but I think this guy is also in that same wheelhouse of athletic, really, really, kind of explosive and has a great catch radius guy. He had the amazing one-handed catch for Florida. But over the last years, Florida has been in a little bit of disarray. I think we can all agree, even with Anthony Richardson being there. There's a lot of this time was spent. He was hurt. He was out for a majority of the time there in Florida, so never really got to see kind of what that totally would have looked like throughout the season. But he was kind of the one shining bright moment on that offense basically over the last 2 years. And he transferred by way of ASU, started off over with the Sun Devils, and was kind of a low recruit, wasn't really necessarily thought of as a big-time player, but he's got a great ability to return kicks, and I think he's a great slot fit. He's quick. He's got a great leaping ability. He's got all the tools that you're looking for, and I think that Ricky Pearsall can make a team really happy if they're able to bring him in. He's also, I do like, looking just at the NFL and where kind of the college landscape is. I'd like to see the guys, with the NIL opportunities are having a chance to stay longer in college and really develop their skill set. And I feel like Ricky Pearsall, through everything, has really taken advantage of that and utilized those years to get better and better every year that he's been with the Florida Gators. And then another guy that's really kind of off the boards that I know nobody is talking about, but somebody that I really like and I find to be super explosive and a really fun player to watch is Anaya Smith out of Texas A&M. Explosive punt returner, an explosive big play for the Aggies over the last 2 years, 2 to 3 years to be exact, right? He's a guy who was kind of a do-it-all for them, right? He's a little bit small. He's obviously smaller in stature, but he's a guy that can go out there and at 5'10", 200, he's still got the squatty frame to go out there and kind of make plays. And he's probably one of my favorite players to watch as far as making people miss. I feel like when this guy jukes people, they completely fall down for some reason, and he completely kind of wipes them off the screen and runs away from them. I don't know what it is about this guy, but some guys just have that it factor when it comes to just being there and being able to make people miss and showing up. And one thing about Anaya Smith, while his production wasn't totally there, still had about 800 yards and 53 catches this last year. He was hurt the year before a little bit, so he's only down about 15 catches. But the years before that, 45, 47 catches on an Aggie team. He's averaged around that 3 to 6 touchdown ratio over his career. So he's had, 5 years there, I believe, at A&M. He stuck it out with them through the good times and the bad, through the Jimbo era, but he's always found a way to show up. And I think that if he gets on the right team, man, he can make somebody really happy. I think that he can be a guy that does a couple of things, maybe even be utilized in this new kickoff and kick return that we're going to see. You got to need people, I think. We don't really know what it's going to look like yet. We've had maybe a look at it from the UFL perspective, but I think one of the things that you got to take into consideration is people who can make people miss in a really quick and short amount of space. And I think Anaya Smith has that kind of quick burst to get in and out of things and then take off, right? Not sure that he's necessarily going to take 100 yards every time, but he can put on the burners and can make people miss. So I like Anaya Smith.
Yeah, he had
a good
some
point about the kickoffs. Yeah.
Yeah,
he did have some.
So I think he might be an interesting player if, like you said, if he gets into the right situation. I mean, maybe he ends up in a San Francisco, type of offense that kind of values the ability to be able to run the ball from the receivers. So, yeah, interesting prospect there. I think he's going to go a lot later than somebody like Pearsall. I think Pearsall has a chance to be a day 2 pick. So yeah, definitely keep your eye on him. I know we're all very long at this point, and if you guys are still with us, thank you, appreciate it a lot. Shout out to Gavin if you're still watching, giving us feedback on this. But the guy I did want to bring up, just because I had him in my, honorable mentions category. Kenny, you didn't have him on your list at all. And Matt had him all the way up at 6. So I think there's like a lot of disparity between us on Xavier Legett. Can we go over him like in 2 minutes? Let's give like a quick rundown on him. Kenny, I'll throw it over to you as to why you didn't have him ranked, and then Matt, maybe you can wrap it up here in 30 seconds on having him all the way up at 6, which means you probably think he's either or probably going to be an early day 2 pick if he's the 6th wide receiver taken.
Yeah, I mean, for me, while I liked Xavier Legett and I liked his production and his play, he's just, 6'3" guy. I think that he's going to be probably a day 2, day 3 type of wide receiver. For me, I would have liked to see more from him as far as, maybe some of the missed games that he's had over the years. I would have loved to see a couple more touchdowns in the years before. But I know that, he did miss with some injuries and at the end of the season. So that's something that kind of steered me away from Xavier Legett. I just want to see, kind of what team he lands with and maybe get a better understanding of where he's going to fit in. I wish I had more of a Matt. I'd love to hear a little bit more from you on Xavier Legett as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like I list him there based on what I see as the upside. So very similar to Keon Coleman. Like I watched the film and, to me, it looks like a cross between Deebo Samuel and AJ Brown. And it's like people that can move like that are built like that. I think if you put him in the right system, like it's just this guy's. I mean, you see what San Francisco does with Deebo Samuel. Like if he was just an X receiver on Carolina, would he be Deebo Samuel? Like no, but I watched this guy and I'm like, man, and I know his production came in his 5th year, and like maybe that's tied to actually having a quarterback with Spencer Rattler. It's like did he elevate Rattler? Did Rattler elevate him? There's a lot of question marks around him. But when I watch him and I picture the potential upside, and it's to your point with the kickoff returns, like that's a guy that could really thrive. And getting rid of the hip tackle, it's like he's a freight train. 4'3", whatever, at 220 pounds. Like, good luck, man. And yeah, I mean that's what really goes into that ranking. But he's one of the guys that I'm really excited to see. I don't really know where to picture him yet, but I hope a team will use him in the right way.
All right, and with that, we ran very long on this. So again, thank you for sticking with us. Thank you so much, Kenny, for joining us on this episode of the Fantasy Football Podcast. Top 10 wide receivers to look out for in the 2024 NFL Draft. We'll talk to you guys again soon.